Today we are going to be talking about Vertigo. A woman's face gives way to a kaleidoscope of credits, signaling the start of Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo to Bernard Herrmann's haunting score. A criminal climbs up the rungs of the ladder to the rooftop on a dark San Francisco night. John Scotty Ferguson, a detective, and a police officer are hot on his trail. They chase him across the top of buildings. The thief jumps between two buildings, making it across. The police officer follows, but Scotty can't get his footing. He slips. Scotty hangs onto the gutter as his fear of heights kicks in. The police officer tries to help him and asks for his hand, but the officer slips and falls to his death. Scotty witnesses this as he clutches the gutter. Months after the incident, Scotty reclines in the home of Marjorie Midgewood, a painter and fashion illustrator. She is concerned about Scotty's plans now that he is back in shape. He has retired from the police force due to his acrophobia, and does not want to be a desk jockey. Midge and Scotty used to be engaged back in college, but it was broken off. Scotty blithely waves their engagement off as a flight of fancy, ended by Midge, but it's clear from Midge's expression that Scotty was more likely the unwilling party and that Midge still holds a torch for him. She urges him to take a vacation. "Don't be so motherly," responds Scotty. They discuss an old college buddy, Gavin Elster, who wants to meet with Scotty. Scotty attempts to gradually get over his fear of heights by using a step stool. He is able to handle the first two steps, but when he reaches the top, he looks out the window down into the street below and panics. He collapses in Midge's arms. Scotty meets Gavin, who is in the shipping business. Gavin married into the business, and he wants Scotty to tail his wife. He does not suspect infidelity, but hints that his wife has been possessed by something. She's become distant and distracted and has taken to roaming the city and surrounding area. The no-nonsense Scotty initially dismisses the supernatural undertones of Gavin's worries, but is nevertheless intrigued. Gavin invites Scotty to observe him and his wife at Ernie's restaurant the following night. Ernie's restaurant is a lavish, upscale eatery, plush and scarlet. Scotty first spots Madeline Elster, who is stunning, with platinum blonde hair, a black dress and a green shawl. He is mesmerized by her. The next morning, he stalks her outside her house. She wears a simple gray suit with white gloves, as she gets into her green automobile. Scotty follows her through the streets of San Francisco, as she visits a flower shop and purchases a small bouquet. He then trails her to the Mission Dolores, where she goes through the chapel to the cemetery, finally stopping to stand at a grave. As she exits, Scotty notes the headstone, which reads Carlotta Valdez, born December 3, 1831, died March 5, 1857. He then tracks her to the Palace of the Legions of Honor, an art museum. Madeline sits, staring at a portrait for hours. Scotty notices that the bouquet she purchased is just like the one in the painting. Also, her hair is done exactly like the woman in the painting. Scotty discovers from the curator that the painting is titled Portrait of Carlotta and he is given a catalog of the paintings. Finally, he follows her to the McKittrick Hotel, where Scotty observes Madeline in a second-story window. Scotty enters the old hotel and asks the manager who the occupant of the room is. She hesitates to tell him, until Scotty reveals his badge. The manager reveals that the woman's name is Carlotta Valdez, but that Miss Valdez has not been in the room all day. Scotty finds this impossible, and goes up to the room, which is indeed empty. He looks down the street to discover that her car is gone. Scotty returns to Midge's home where he asks her for a local historian expert. She tells him of San Francisco historian Pop Liebel, Constantine Shane, who owns the Argosy book shop. She and Scotty pay Pop a visit and Scotty asks the man about the McKittrick Hotel. Pop tells Scotty that the hotel was originally a house built by a rich man for his mistress, Carlotta Valdez, and they had a child. However, the rich man eventually discarded Carlotta, keeping their child to raise with his childless wife. Carlotta went from depressed to insane, and finally took her own life. On the drive home, Midge and Scotty talk about the portrait. He shows her the catalog picture. The resemblance is uncanny. Another conversation with Gavin reveals that Madeline had started to wear Carlotta's jewelry, particularly a ruby pendant shown in the painting. Madeline's great-grandmother was Carlotta Valdez, a fact that Madeline does not know. Gavin only knows this fact because Madeline's mother told him. Scotty follows Madeline the next day to the Palace of the Legions, where she gazes at the portrait. Then he follows her to Fort Point near the Golden Gate Bridge. Madeline strolls by the shore, throwing petals into the bay, until without warning, she jumps in. Scotty dives after her. She is alive but unconscious, and he takes her back to his apartment. Madeline wakes up at Scotty's apartment, perplexed and alarmed to find herself naked in a strange man's bed. Scotty hands her a red bathrobe and explains that he rescued her from drowning. Madeline maintains that she must have fainted and fallen. He questions her, "Has this ever happened to you before?" Gavin calls, concerned about the whereabouts of his wife. Scotty reassures him that Madeline is at his apartment. Gavin informs Scotty that Madeline is 26, the same age at which Carlotta Valdez committed suicide. Scotty hears the door close, and realizes that Madeline has left. As Madeline drives away from Scotty's house, Midge arrives just in time to have a misunderstanding. She believes that Scotty and Madeline are in a relationship. The next morning, Scotty trails Madeline through the streets of San Francisco, only to find that Madeline has been looking for Scotty's house. Scotty catches her leaving a thank you letter for saving her. She did not know the address, but followed the Coit Tower. Scotty, now smitten with Madeline, insists that they wander together, because they are both alone. They arrive at Big Basin Redwood State Park, where they admire the ancient redwoods. As they view a cross-section of a tree with the approximate dates of historical events, Madeline goes into a trance, seemingly becoming Carlotta, recounting the dates of her birth and death. Madeline wanders deeper into the woods, and Scotty follows her. He confronts her about her jump into the bay, and tries to bring Madeline back. By the shore, Madeline begins to reveal fragments of her vague memories, an empty grave with no name, waiting for her, an empty room in which she sits alone, and finally a tower, bell, and garden in Spain. Madeline admits she is not crazy, she does not want to die. They drive to the beach and kiss as the waves crash onto the rocks. Scotty promises he will never leave her. Scotty arrives at Midge's place upon having received a note from Midge inquiring as to his whereabouts. Midge mischievously reveals a new picture she's been painting, a portrait of herself as Carlotta Valdez. Scotty is not amused by the gag. Distressed, he leaves immediately. Midge ruins the painting, upset by the depth of his feeling for Madeline and her own misguided attempt to make light of it, which has distanced them further. Madeline returns to Scotty's house, where she tells him of an awful dream, with a tower, a bell, and a village. As she describes the location in detail, Scotty finishes her descriptions. "You've been there?" he exclaims. Scotty is talking about the San Juan Bautista, a mission that has been converted into a museum. They drive to the mission. When they arrive at the mission, they enter the livery stable, where Scotty tries to dismiss the dreams logically. He points out certain objects that are real. They kiss. Madeline explains she must do something. She asks him if he believes she loves him. He replies yes. "And if you lose me, then you'll know I loved you. And I wanted to go on loving you," she says. She starts to go to the church, when Scotty realizes she is going to the bell tower. Scotty chases her into the chapel, and sees her run up the stairs. He follows her, but as he looks down, his vertigo sets in, paralyzing him. He cannot follow her up to the top of the bell tower. He watches, helpless, in fear and horror as Madeline's body plunges to the tiles below. Scotty staggers out of the mission, sun blinding his eyes, dumbfounded. At the judicial hearing concerning Madeline's death, the judge is particularly cruel to Scotty. He insults him for letting his weakness get in the way of saving Madeline. The court rules the incident a suicide. Gavin comforts Scotty, while telling him that, with the loss of his wife, he can no longer stay in San Francisco. Gavin sets off for Europe. Scotty has trouble sleeping. Blue and purple flashes signal his nightmare, as an animated bouquet unravels. He dreams of seeing Carlotta Valdez at the hearing, with special emphasis on the ruby necklace. Scotty walks into the cemetery where there is an open grave. Scotty falls into the grave, which has become precipitous, then his body lands next to Madeline's on the tiles of the mission. He wakes up in a cold sweat. Midge arrives to care for Scotty in a psychiatric ward. She tries to comfort him, "Mother's here." Scotty will not speak, he is in a daze. The doctor believes that Scotty will be incapacitated for a year due to stress and anxiety from his depression and guilt. Several months later, upon his eventual release from the hospital, Scotty remains in the grip of an obsession. He visits the old Elster home, and spots the green car. In the distance, a woman in a gray suit is getting in it. Unfortunately for him, it is not Madeline, it is an older neighbor who bought the car from Gavin. At Ernie's he spots a woman in a green evening dress, but again, it is not Madeline. He even sees Madeline at the Palace of the Legions, but once again, it is not her. While looking at a bouquet at a flower shop, he sees a striking brunette in a green dress who resembles Madeline. He follows her to the Hotel Empire, and sees her through the 5th floor window. When Scotty knocks on the door, the woman is concerned that he is a creep. He reassures her he just wants to talk. He interrogates her rather aggressively, and she shows him proof that she is Judy Barton from Salina, Kansas. Judy realizes that Scotty's heart is broken for his former flame, and she takes pity on him. She agrees to go for dinner with him later at Ernie's. After Scotty leaves, Flashbacks reveal Judy's memories. She was Madeline, running up the steps of the bell tower. At the top, Gavin Elster was there, holding the body of the real Madeline Elster, dressed in exactly the same outfit as Judy. It was the real Madeline's body that was thrown off the bell tower, with Judy letting out the scream. Judy even keeps the gray suit that she wore as Madeline Elster hidden in the back of her closet. She begins to write a letter to Scotty, explaining that she was Gavin's accomplice in the murder of his wife. She had pretended to be Madeline to fool Scotty, and use him as a witness to lend credence to the idea that Madeline was mentally unstable. Gavin had known about his vertigo, and knew that Scotty would never make it to the top of the bell tower. Judy reconsiders this letter, and tears it up, deciding she wants to be with Scotty rather than run away. That night, Scotty mistakes another patron for Madeline at Ernie's. He escorts Judy home, her apartment flooded with the green neon light of the Hotel Empire sign. He's overwhelmed by his yearning for Madeline, a woman lost to him, although through Judy he is able to capture the ghost of Madeline's presence. They agree to meet the next morning and go out with Judy having to make some excuse to her employer. They engage in a series of dates, with Scotty becoming happier with the relationship. However, little by little he begins to make Judy over in the image of Madeline. He searches obsessively for the gray suit and white gloves that Madeline used to wear and even convinces Judy to bleach her hair. Although Judy begs him to love her for herself, she is so in love with Scotty that she allows him to change her into Madeline. After undergoing an extensive makeover, Judy returns to an anxiously awaiting Scotty. Scotty won't brook the slightest deviation from his recreation of Madeline, and insists that Judy pin her now platinum blonde hair up exactly the way Madeline wore hers, which she does, completing the transformation. In a dreamlike state, with the green glow all around them, they embrace and kiss. The room turns into the livery stable from the mission, Scotty's last kiss with Madeline, and then back to the apartment. Scotty has finally managed to turn back time and resurrect Madeline from the dead. A couple of nights later, the two decide to go out to Ernie's. Judy dresses up, and puts on the same ruby pendant depicted in the portrait of Carlotta. Scotty realizes that something is amiss. He suddenly becomes distant. He suggests they not go to Ernie's and go south down the coast and continue driving past the redwood forest. He tells her he has one final thing to do. Judy is torn between her love for Scotty and the fear and guilt she feels over having colluded with Gavin Elster. They arrive at the mission, where Scotty forces Judy to reenact Madeline's last moments, their final kiss, Madeline's parting words. He relentlessly pushes Judy up the stairs of the mission tower, discovering in the process that his vertigo is not as limiting as it was. He reveals to Judy that her putting on the necklace that belonged to Carlotta is what gave her away. As he reaches the top of the bell tower, he puts the whole puzzle together. He finally realizes that Judy was the counterfeit all along. He never knew the real Madeline Elster. He was being set up as Gavin Elster's witness in the murder of Elster's wife. He pulls Judy to the top of the tower, where she protests. Judy pleads that she has fallen in love with Scotty. They kiss. The sudden appearance of a woman in the shadows, however, startles Judy, who steps backwards and plummets to her death off the ledge. A nun steps into the light, and in the final shot, as the nun tolls the death bell, a devastated Scotty stands frozen in despair, having now lost the same woman twice, and this time forever. Bringing us to the end of the movie. Comment below what you think. If you haven't already, like and subscribe.